Can you imagine living in a place where you can't be alone with a woman, where there are no traffic lights, or dying from tubing? Located between Thailand, Cambodia, Vietnam, China, and Myanmar, Laos is the only landlocked country in Southeast Asia. With thousands of beautiful natural and archaeological sites, the nation has a rich cultural history. But this youngest country in Asia is not without its mysteries. This is the dark side of Laos. Many people might be familiar with the conflict between the US and Vietnam, but did you know that Laos was the location of America's secret war during the period? It's an often forgotten chapter of history, a 9-year CIA-led military campaign where the US launched secret bombing. The operation was done without informing Congress. Thus, it was dubbed the Secret War. From 1964 to 1973, the US dropped around 2.5 million tons of explosives, making Laos the most bombed nation in history if we go on a per-person basis. The bombing is meant to support the Royal Lao government to disrupt traffic along the Ho Chi Minh Trail. The bombs drop like rain, razing entire villages to the ground and making farms and fields unusable. Thousands of innocent villagers were killed, and those who survived were traumatized throughout their whole lives. Many of the villagers were displaced and had to relocate, with most resettling in the United States as refugees. Traumatized refugees weren't the only result of America's secret war. The millions of bombs that were dropped in Laos didn't detonate upon impact. This left over 80 million cluster munitions of unexploded bombs. For years, Lao people had to live with hidden dangers in their backyard. Since the end of the secret war, an additional 20,000 civilians were killed by this Unexploded Ordinance, or UXO. In 2024 alone, 21 casualties have been reported, with 40% of the victims being children. UXO doesn't just injure or kill people, but it leaves the land barren and impossible to use in the long term. It took 31 years after the first bomb for the US to acknowledge the issue and start demining efforts. Many Lao people are now getting into the demining business as well, using metal detectors to clear the fields from UXO. They can sell the UXO to local vendors who will melt the metal and create innovative products. Despite all these efforts, only 10% of contaminated land in Laos has been cleared. Millions of UXOs are still left, and dozens are still getting injured or killed every year. If you ever visit Laos, then there's one rule you must familiarize yourself with. Never be alone with a Lao woman if you're not married to her. Laos has its own set of rules and customs when it comes to courtship and dating, and one of them is a very conservative take on physical relations. Although Lao women can be very flirtatious, you should be aware of the local laws and regulations. According to Laotian law, physical relations between unmarried people are illegal in Laos. Typically, the hotels will check your papers when you reserve a room. If you ever get caught being alone with the opposite sex by the authorities, you can get penalized. For a Lao woman and a non-Lao man, relations are not permitted unless the man has paid a dowry to the woman's family and the union is already approved by the local Lao authorities. If you fail to follow this rule, you will be charged with a US $500 fine and upwards. This also goes for non-Lao women who are interested in Lao men or same-sex couples. So although a foreign romance might seem enticing, be aware of the potential troubles it could bring. Aside from this rule, Lao women are often married off too young. Child brides are common in the country. Around 33% of Lao girls marry before their 18th birthday, while 7% of the girls marry before turning 15 years old. This might be due to the regulations of the country, where the legal age to marry is only 15 years old. That's why most rural parts of the country consider girls to be mature and ready for marriage when they're only 14 years old. Most girls who are young brides come from underprivileged families in rural areas, as poverty often drives parents to marry off their daughters. Girls' education is not a priority in Lao family values, because boys are the ones who inherit the family property, while girls leave home to marry. Marriage is seen as means of economic survival and security for families. When they join the groom's family, girls are mostly seen as free labor for domestic responsibilities, and the girl's family will receive a compensating dowry in return. There's even a harmful traditional practice of chubni and chubzaje, where a woman is forced to marry a man in certain communities. This practice often involves bribing the family a sum of money in exchange for their daughter. Recognizing the issue, the country vowed to end child and forced marriages by 2030, and finally set the minimum age to marry to 18 years old, following international conventions. There's also a hotline set up by the government for brides to call in when they're being forced into a marriage or in an emergency. Laos is full of beautiful women, but be mindful of this fact. It's very hard for foreigners to get married to a Lao girl or even date them. The government has a very strict law for marriage between Lao and non-Lao. That's because Lao girls are susceptible to being victims of love scams. Often, foreigners marry them quickly to bring them outside of the country and then force them into illicit activities without them knowing beforehand. Because this often happens, the government decided to create new regulations to protect their women. Under the new rules, foreigners who want to marry their Lao sweethearts are required to be a resident in Laos for at least 3 consecutive months and have to provide a variety of personal documents for a background check. After that, they may lodge a marriage certificate application, which will take at least 3 months to process. If the person is deemed untrustworthy by the Lao government, they will delay the marriage or never be permitted. Anyone who attempts to not follow the Lao law governing marriage between foreigners and Lao citizens may result in the deportation of the foreigner and prohibited from re-entry. Laos is a very conservative country, with the majority of the people being Buddhist. That means you should refrain from PDA, such as hugging or kissing in the streets of Laos, as it's frowned upon. The people in Laos aren't very affectionate among their friends or even romantic partners. Friends may hug each other, but couples should keep that to a confined space. For couples, holding hands is socially acceptable, but anything more intimate than that is just plain rude. Aside from PDA, Lao people also dress very modestly, showing very little skin above their elbow or mid-calf. Foreigners can wear something short, but something that's excessively open will get negative attention from the locals. The main idea is about respecting each other's boundaries. Lao people take a much more gentle approach to human connections, so everything should be done more calmly, never aggressively. Have you ever heard of a quaint little village surrounded by the jungle called Bang Vieng? It's a dangerous attraction where many tourists have lost their lives. Bang Vieng was once a very quiet rural area, but now it's a must-visit destination, especially for young backpackers around the world. It all started in the 1990s when locals' favorite pastime of riding tractor tire inner tubes, also known as tubing down the Nam Song River, gained popularity and reached overseas. You can now see many wooden bars being opened along the river banks, enticing tourists with party, music, alcohol, giant water slides, and rope swings. Tourists can easily find happy pizzas and magic shakes that are laced with illicit materials. The combination of young tourists, alcohol, and drugs results in terrible accidents. The local hospital receives at least 10 backpackers every day who arrive with broken bones or infected gashes. Some even lost their lives. A tourist from Australia somersaulted from a dangerous area and fatally cracked his skull. According to the hospital, around 20 people die every year because of tubing accidents. Locals even speculated that the river is cursed now since it has claimed so many lives. The situation got so dangerous that the country banned tubing in 2012, but it was reopened after a few adjustments. The bars are more regulated now, without the excessive alcohol or party music. Thanks to the changes, tubing sessions in Vang Vieng are less rowdy and safer than it was before. One particular heritage site in Laos that still intrigues experts to this day is the mysterious Plains of Jars. Located 400 kilometers northeast of the Lao capital, Vientiane, Plains of Jars is the country's most impressive megalithic attraction. Dating back to 2,500 years ago, the site has many scattered stone jars with enormous dimensions. Some can be as big as 3 meters tall and 1 meter wide. Some people believe that they were urns for prehistoric burial rituals for people who traveled between the Mekong River and the Gulf of Tonkin. Locals believe that the stone vessels were created to brew potent rice wine to celebrate the victory of a band of mythical giants who lived in the mountains. Nevertheless, the mysterious site is an intriguing place to visit when you're in Laos, whether you tend to believe in the supernatural or not. Although Laos is conservative, it's surprisingly the #1 alcohol consumer in Southeast Asia. Some said that the people's shy nature contributes to their drinking culture, so they can let go. Laos has a unique drinking culture where it's used as means of bonding and fun. People are encouraged to drink as much as they can to pay respect. Before you grab a drink, you might want to get to know these drinking rules in Laos. In Laotian parties, drinking is communal, so you're expected to enjoy it with everyone and not alone. You should also wait for the host to start before drinking. The host will pour the first drink to honor the house spirit, then for himself and others. When you're drinking in Laos, you can't hog the bottle for yourself. Instead, pass it to the person on your left. Lastly, you're expected to drink as much as you can at a Laotian party. According to local customs, it's said that you should drink at least 9 shots in one affair. Refusing to drink can be considered offensive, so you can adopt skillful ways to avoid drinking when you have too much. Try pretending to drink and quietly pour the shot when everyone is busy, or spit the drink out when no one is looking. Lastly, always know your limit, since most alcoholic drinks in Laos are very potent. For example, a well-known type of rice whiskey in Lao Lao has about 50% alcohol content by volume. Imagine taking a stroll around the city without worrying about noisy cars or traffic lights. That's a luxury you can experience when you're in Luang Prabang, the ancient capital city where the Mekong River flows through. It's a must-visit in the country of million elephants, and it's called the Land of Buddha. There's even a local saying that goes, if you haven't been to Luang Prabang, you haven't been to our country. The city is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, which explains why it's thoroughly preserved and traditional. You won't find any convenience stores, chain restaurants, or even movie theaters in Luang Prabang, as they're all about taking things slow. Another nickname for Luang Prabang is the City of Giving Way, because it has no traffic lights and car horns are forbidden. When people are on the road, they cannot honk at each other or jostle for right of way. Instead, people who are in an urgent situation would just flash the light upon other drivers to ask for a path. The rules to blinking are flash once if you're in a hurry, flash twice if you're in an emergency. Never flash or blink your lights continuously, or worse, honk. People would immediately identify you as an outsider and reprimand you. If you ever find yourself in a situation with the local police in Laos, never argue and just do as they say. It's common knowledge that the underpaid police force in the country is just looking for a chance to extort money from tourists. It's very inadvisable to put up a fight or go to the police station to give them a version of your story. The justice system in Laos can be quite unfair, especially to uninformed tourists. For instance, you might even see them working together with women or drug dealers in bars. When their counterparts have successfully trapped you in a compromising position, the police will barge in and charge you with a crime. So always be mindful when you're enjoying your holiday in Laos and stay away from risky situations. Violence against women is a worldwide issue, and Laos is not an exception. Violence against women is alarmingly common in the country. According to a survey conducted on a national level, about 1 in 3 women, both married or in a partnership, reported to have experienced at least one type of violence from their partners. Sadly, the reality is even worse than what the survey disclosed. Only 1 in 5 women who experienced abuse turned to local authorities for help. Only 4% reached out to local police, and 3% to health services. This is directly due to discriminatory treatments against the female gender and inadequate services or support systems. The high number of incidences is fueled by skewed perceptions in the country. According to the Laos Social Indicators Survey, 16% of men believe that violence from a husband is justified when the wife couldn't meet societal expectations. About 30% of women even agreed with this statement, painting a clear picture of where a woman stands in Laotian society. Thankfully, organizations such as the Lao Women's Union are trying to change things. The organization aims to protect women's rights and their right to live a life free of violence. They now serve as a safer space for women in Laos to turn to during tough times, providing shelter and guidance when needed. When you're walking the streets of any city in Laos, you might notice that Laos never has a shortage of monks. But even if they're everywhere, there's one rule you should know: never touch a monk in Laos. It's considered rude if you're a man and taboo if you're a woman. That's because of the principles they uphold in the Buddhist monastery. To become a monk, a male must shave his head, refrain from smoking and drinking alcohol, and be celibate. Monks in Laos cannot sit beside a woman, let alone touch them. Monks are not even allowed to touch anything that a woman is currently touching. For example, if you want to show a monk something, you should set it down first before they can pick it up. You can't directly give them the item, especially if you're a woman. The only exception to this rule is when you're giving the monks morning alms by placing food or money into the monk's bowl. There's a few reasons why you can easily find monks in Laos, one of them being the economy. When you're out of work, males can become a monk to receive food offerings and have a place to stay. Most of the young men in rural areas of Laos are sent to become a Buddhist monk by their parents. That way, they'll receive free education and livelihood, relieving parents of their children. Monks are well respected in Laos, as they're the ones responsible to lead religious ceremonies and provide counseling to the general public. Although Laos is a very safe country, you should never go anywhere remote without a tour guide. Tourists who are traveling on their own might benefit more by sticking to well-known places such as Luang Prabang or Vientiane. Outside of those two areas, you should consult a local guide. One of the reasons is that most communications in these areas are difficult. You won't easily find someone who speaks English or understands you. You'll end up getting the wrong information and not enjoying your holiday. There's also a significant danger with traffic accidents. Motorbike and tuk-tuk drivers are unlike any drivers you'll encounter in the West, so it's best to stick to reputable transportation services or ask your guide to provide one for you. There's also issues with local law enforcement officers. If you're not careful, you'll be more susceptible to scams and extortions. Hiring a local guide will add another protective layer and help you avoid risky situations. Lastly, under no circumstances should travelers go hiking or walking on foot in northern Laos. This is because 30% of Laos has millions of unexploded mines, which could injure or fatally wound you if you encounter them. Beneath the quiet allure of Laos lies complex stories and hidden challenges. While the country captivates people with its charm, visitors should navigate its intricacies with respect and awareness.